The first thing Dorothea Hale noticed about the stranger was not the mud on his coat, the tear along one sleeve, or the rain dripping from his dark hair onto the stone beside the servant's entrance. It was the way he looked at the piece of bread in her hand and then deliberately looked away. England, October 18, 1846. Rain had been falling over Hampshire since late afternoon, turning the roads around Redmarsh Hall into dark ribbons of mud and driving the household indoors beneath blazing lamps and polished chandeliers. Upstairs, Lady Marcella Brackenlow's guests were finishing a formal dinner beneath silver plate and candlelight. Downstairs, Dorothea stood in the narrow passage beside the back steps, with everything she owned that could be called supper wrapped in an old cream-colored breadcloth. A heel of brown bread, a wedge of hard cheese. Half an apple she had saved from breakfast. Tomorrow morning, Silas Kersey had informed her she would surrender her keys and leave Redmarsh without a reference. Her offence had been named insolence. No one had troubled to give it another name. Dorothea had spent enough years in service to understand that a servant could be honest for a decade and still be ruined by one word from the right mouth. She was 29 years old, tired, hungry, and too proud to cry where anyone could see her. She had come outside because the servants' hall felt unbearable that evening. Whispers followed a dismissed maid more faithfully than friends did. Then she saw the man sitting on the lowest stone step near the passage wall. He looked less like a gentleman than someone who had walked through half the county in a storm. Mud darkened his boots to the ankles and streaked the hem of his coat. One shoulder was soaked through. The cloth at his sleeve had torn, though there was no blood beneath it. He sat very still, as if conserving strength, with his hands loosely clasped and his gaze fixed somewhere beyond the rain. Dorothea stopped. The stranger turned his head. His face was lean, controlled, and older than hers by perhaps 10 years. Nothing about him invited pity that made her more aware of how cold he must be. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly. His eyes rested on her face. I had begun to suspect as much. His voice was educated, not merely literate, but shaped by habit and authority. Dorothea glanced toward the passage door. "Mr. Kersey will have you sent away if he finds you." "Will he?" "Yes." The stranger looked toward the dark yard. "Then I shall try not to offend him by dying on his steps." She almost smiled. "Almost. You aren't dying. That is reassuring. You are wet, covered in mud, and trespassing. Less reassuring." Dorothea looked again at the bread in her hand. Hunger tightened low in her stomach. She knew precisely how long the bread should last if she left Redmarsh at dawn and found no work immediately. One meal tonight. Perhaps part of breakfast tomorrow if she was disciplined. After that, uncertainty. The stranger noticed the glance. His expression changed by almost nothing, but he shifted as if preparing to rise. "I won't trouble you." Dorothea hated those words, not because they were dramatic, but because she had heard servants use them when they were injured, elderly, frightened, or ashamed of needing anything at all. "I will not trouble you," as if hunger were bad manners, as if exhaustion were an imposition. She sat on the step above him. "When did you last eat?" He did not answer immediately. "That is not your concern." "Then you have learned the manners of this house very quickly." His eyes came back to hers. Dorothea unwrapped the cloth. In one corner, stitched in faded green thread, was a small sprig of wheat her mother had embroidered years before. The stitches were uneven now, softened by use and washing. It was the one thing Dorothea still owned that had been made by hands that had loved her without condition. She broke the bread. She hesitated only once, then gave the stranger the larger portion. He looked at it, but did not take it. "That is your supper, half of it." "It was all of it a moment ago. You have sharp eyes for a man who claims not to be dying, and you are a poor liar. I am not lying. You gave me the larger piece." Dorothea held it out farther. "Then don't waste my generosity by arguing with it." For the first time, something warmer passed through his expression. Not amusement exactly. Recognition, perhaps. He accepted the bread. Dorothea divided the cheese, then the apple. She turned away for a moment to fetch a cup of water from the narrow pitcher kept near the passage. When she sat again, her portion of bread was larger than she remembered. She looked at him. He had already begun eating. "You changed them." "Changed what?" "The bread." "I have no idea what you mean. You are also a poor liar." "Then we have found common ground." This time she did smile, though only briefly. They ate without speaking. Rain struck the yard stones and hissed beneath the eaves. Somewhere above them, a burst of distant laughter carried from the dining rooms. Dorothea imagined the silver dishes, the warm sauces. The untouched bread returned to the kitchen. She had carried trays through rooms where people left enough food behind to feed every servant below stairs, and never once seemed to see the contradiction. The stranger did not eat greedily. He ate with controlled hunger, which was somehow worse. Dorothea wondered where he had come from, why a man with that voice wore a torn coat, and why he seemed less embarrassed by his condition than angry at something he had not yet named. "What is your name?" he asked. Dorothea folded the breadcloth over the remaining crumbs. "Dorothea. Only Dorothea. For tonight, yes." "Very well." He inclined his head slightly. "Only Dorothea." Before she could ask his name, the passage door opened behind them. Light spilled over the stones. Silas Kersey stood in the doorway. He was a broad, well-kept man in his 50s, with neat side whiskers, a black coat, and the polished calm of someone who had spent years making cruelty look like administration. His gaze moved from Dorothea to the stranger, then to the breadcloth in her lap. "What is this?" Dorothea stood. A traveller needed food. A traveller. Kersey stepped into the passage. "And you decided the provisions of Lady Rotherby's household were yours to distribute." "They are mine." "Yours?" "My ration." Kersey's mouth tightened. "You expect me to believe that?" "I expect nothing from you, Mr. Kersey." The silence that followed was dangerous. Dorothea knew it the instant the words left her. Kersey knew it too. The stranger rose beside her. Standing, he seemed taller than he had on the step, and despite the mud, there was something in his posture that made the narrow passage feel suddenly smaller. Kersey looked at him with open disdain. "You out!" The stranger did not move. "The lady gave me her own food." Dorothea turned slightly toward him. No one had called her a lady in years. Kersey gave a humorless laugh. "She is no lady. She is a servant who has forgotten her place." "Then remind me," the stranger said quietly, "why her place requires hunger." Kersey's face hardened. "This matter does not concern you." "It concerned me the moment she fed me." Kersey reached toward the breadcloth. "Give me that." His fingers had nearly touched the folded linen when the stranger caught his wrist. Not violently, not even tightly. He simply stopped him. The movement was so calm that Dorothea felt her breath pause. "Don't," the stranger said. One word, nothing raised, nothing dramatic. Yet Kersey froze. For a moment, the two men looked at one another, and Dorothea saw something she could not explain. Kersey was better dressed. Kersey belonged to Redmarsh. Kersey controlled wages, duties, keys, references, punishments. But he was not the more powerful man in that passage. He seemed to sense it too. The stranger released him. Kersey stepped back, anger coloring his face. "You will leave before dawn," he said to Dorothea. "You will surrender every household key in your possession. You will receive no reference from Redmarsh Hall, and if so much as one item is found missing after your departure, I shall see that every respectable house in Hampshire hears your name." Dorothea felt the words strike where he intended. Her employment was not merely ending. He meant to make certain she could not begin again. Still, she folded the breadcloth carefully over the green-stitched wheat and held it against her palm. "I understand." The stranger looked at her, and for the first time that evening, something in his restraint broke. Not outwardly, not enough for Kersey to notice. But Dorothea saw it in his eyes. Cold anger, controlled and absolute. Kersey turned back toward the house. "At dawn," he repeated. Then he shut the door behind him. Darkness returned to the passage. Dorothea stood in the rain-cooled silence with a stranger whose name she did not know, one half of an apple gone, tomorrow's hunger already waiting, and the certainty that by sunrise she would possess neither employment nor reference. Beside her, the mud-stained man looked at the closed door as though he had just been shown something he would not forget. Before dawn, Dorothea learned that humiliation could be made to sound as orderly as the turning of a key. She had slept perhaps an hour in the narrow attic room she shared with another maid. Though sleep was hardly the word for it, she had lain fully dressed beneath a thin blanket, listening to rain soften against the roof and counting the things she would have to carry when she left. 2 gowns, 1 pair of serviceable boots, a comb with 3 missing teeth, her private tally notebook hidden beneath folded linen, the embroidered breadcloth, almost nothing. And yet enough to remind her how quickly a life could be reduced to what one person could carry down a back staircase before breakfast. When the first grey light entered the room, Dorothea rose without waking the other maid. She washed in cold water, pinned her hair, and put on her service dress because Mr. Kersey had not yet formally dismissed her. That distinction mattered in a household built on distinctions. Below stairs, the kitchen fires had only begun to catch. A scullery maid stared at Dorothea and then looked away. The footman at the passage door became suddenly interested in polishing a brass fitting. No one wished to be seen offering kindness to a servant who might leave without a reference. Dorothea understood. Fear had its own etiquette. She found Silas Kersey in the service corridor outside his office, already dressed, already immaculate, as though men like him never slept and never doubted themselves. The stranger from the night before stood farther down the passage near the cold hearth, still wearing the same mud-stained coat. His dark hair had dried untidily. The tear at one sleeve remained. He looked exhausted, but not diminished. Dorothea felt an unexpected relief at seeing him. She did not let it show. Kersey held out his hand. "Your keys." Dorothea drew the ring from the narrow pocket sewn into her dress. 7 keys, linen press, upper corridor cupboards, 2 bedchambers used by guests, a small locked cabinet for lamp supplies. She placed the ring in his palm. "All of them?" he asked. "Every household key entrusted to me." Kersey weighed the ring in his hand as if testing the truth of her answer. "And yet you were willing to question household provisions." The stranger's gaze sharpened. Dorothea kept her voice calm. "I asked why 3 weeks of wages had not been paid." Kersey looked at her. The silence changed. It was not long, but it was enough. The stranger heard it. Dorothea knew he had. You were told that household accounts were not your concern, Kersey said. I was told many things, and still you persisted. Because wages owed do not become less owed when a servant asks about them. The kitchen maid at the far end of the passage stopped moving. Kersey noticed and dismissed her with a look. Then he turned back to Dorothea. This is precisely the insolence I referred to last night. The stranger stepped away from the hearth. You dismissed her for asking why she had not been paid. Kersey regarded him with cold annoyance. You remain here only because the storm made removing you inconvenient. That was not my question. You are in no position to question me. Something passed over the stranger's face, not anger exactly. Something quieter and therefore more dangerous. No, he said. Not yet. Dorothea looked at him, but he had already turned his attention back to Kersey. Has she been paid? Kersey's jaw tightened. There have been temporary delays affecting several members of staff. How many? That is a private household matter. How long? You mistake yourself for someone entitled to answers. The stranger's eyes moved to Dorothea. 3 weeks? She hesitated. Kersey's stare warned her. She answered anyway. For me, longer for 2 others, unless they have been paid since yesterday. Kersey's composure thinned. You will go upstairs, collect your possessions, and be gone by sunrise. No, the stranger said. It was the first time he had spoken the word without explanation. Kersey turned. I beg your pardon? She will not be put onto a wet road before sunrise. And who, exactly, will prevent it? The sound came before the answer. Wheels in the outer yard, hooves striking wet stone. A carriage drew up beyond the service court, followed by voices, hurried steps, and the sharp opening of a door. Kersey frowned. Dorothea did not move. The stranger's expression did not change at all. A moment later, a man entered the passage wearing a dark traveling coat, his boots muddied, but his dress, unmistakably, that of a gentleman's personal servant. Behind him came one of Redmarsh's footmen, visibly confused. The new arrival stopped when he saw the mud-stained stranger. Relief crossed his face. He bowed. Your Grace. No one spoke. Dorothea felt the corridor become still around her. Not quiet. Still. The words seemed to settle over every stone, every key, every listening servant who had drifted close enough to hear. Your Grace. The stranger inclined his head once. Pritchard. The valet stepped forward. I am sorry, Your Grace. The wheelwright came sooner than expected, but the coachman could not put weight on his ankle. We made him comfortable at the gate lodge before coming on. The Duke. Dorothea looked at the man who had eaten brown bread beside her in the rain. The man Kersey had ordered into the road. The man who had exchanged the larger piece of bread when her back was turned. She should have felt foolish. Instead, she felt something far more uncomfortable. Exposed, she remembered every word she had spoken to him. You are wet, covered in mud, and trespassing. Less reassuring. Her stomach tightened. Kersey's face had lost color. Your Grace, he said carefully, there has been a misunderstanding. The Duke looked at him. Several, apparently. Kersey straightened. Had I known your identity, naturally you would have been received according to your rank. That is precisely the problem. Dorothea lowered her eyes. She did not want him to look at her now, not because he was a duke, though the knowledge altered every line around him. She feared the story that would be told. A maid had fed an unknown duke and gained his notice. By breakfast, kindness could become calculation. By luncheon, hunger could become seduction. Society did not need facts when a lower woman rose into view. The Duke turned toward her. Dorothea. She curtsied. Your Grace. The title felt strange after saying his name had never been offered. You did not call me that last night. I didn't know who you were. Would it have changed the bread? She looked up despite herself. Yes. A faint line appeared between his brows. How? I would have assumed you were not in danger of going hungry. For one brief moment, his expression softened. Then Kersey spoke. Your Grace, Miss Hale, was being dismissed for repeated insolence before. Your unfortunate arrival. Her conduct is entirely separate from whatever hospitality she chose to extend. It was the first time the Duke heard her family name. Dorothea saw him register it. Hale, he repeated nothing aloud. 3 weeks of unpaid wages are separate as well? He asked. Kersey stiffened. The household accounts have suffered delays. Then I assume Lady Marcella is aware. The Dowager Countess does not concern herself with the minor management of servants. Yet Miss Hale is to lose her livelihood for asking about minor management. Kersey opened his mouth. The Duke did not raise his voice. I will speak with Lady Marcella. Her ladyship has not yet risen. She will. Kersey stared at him. The balance of the corridor had changed completely, and everyone knew it. The same man, who had been treated as a vagrant hours earlier, now stood in mud-stained clothes, while Redmarsh's steward measured every breath. Dorothea wished the reversal pleased her more. Instead, she felt the danger of being placed at its center. Your Grace, she said quietly. He looked at her at once. I don't want charity. Kersey almost smiled. The Duke did not. Good, he said. I did not offer it. I also don't want to remain here because you feel indebted over half a meal. Something unreadable moved in his eyes. It was not half. She nearly frowned. Then she remembered the larger piece he had returned to her. Against all sense, warmth touched her face. Kersey noticed. That was worse. The Duke noticed that too. You will remain until I have heard the reason for your dismissal from more than one mouth, he said. After that, you may decide what you wish to do. Dorothea studied him. There was authority in every word, but not a command directed at her. That distinction mattered. And if Lady Marcella objects, she asked, then I shall leave Redmarsh Hall immediately. Kersey inhaled. The Duke turned toward him. You may inform her ladyship that the Duke of Calderwick has no intention of remaining beneath a roof where a maid can be denied 3 weeks of wages, threatened with dismissal for asking why, and sent on to a wet road before dawn, merely because someone prefers silence to explanation. The corridor had filled with listening stillness again. Dorothea felt every eye on her. She hated it. She also knew she would remember the next moment for the rest of her life. The Duke looked past Kersey toward the staircase leading to the upper rooms. Now, he said, why has a maid been unpaid for 3 weeks? By the following morning, Dorothea had discovered that a duke could change the temperature of a household without raising his voice. Redmarsh Hall had not become kinder after Rupert Northcote revealed himself as the Duke of Calderwick. It had become careful. Footmen moved more quickly when he entered a room. Kersey lowered his eyes half a second sooner than he had before. Even the housekeeper, who had spent 20 years mastering the art of appearing unmoved, now inspected every tray twice before it left the servants' corridor. Lady Marcella had permitted Dorothea to remain, though the permission had been delivered through clenched dignity and presented as if it had been her own idea. No explanation had been offered for the missing wages. No apology had been made. Dorothea had expected neither. She had been assigned to the upper corridor that morning, far from the breakfast room, but near enough to see servants passing with silver coffee pots, covered dishes, fresh rolls, and folded newspapers, the same house that had threatened to send her into the rain without a reference, now seemed terrified that one guest might find his coffee lukewarm. She was dusting the carved table beneath the long east window when she heard the breakfast-room doors open below. Voices carried faintly through the central hall. Dorothea told herself not to look. Then she looked. Rupert descended the staircase wearing dark mourning clothes, clean linen, and a perfectly tied cravat. The mud was gone. The torn coat had disappeared into the care of his valet. His hair was neat. His boots shone. Yet it was not the clothes that altered him. It was the response around him. A footman stepped back. A visiting gentleman rose. One of Lady Marcella's guests broke off mid-sentence. Kersey, standing near the lower hall, bowed. Dorothea watched. The same man who had been ordered into the road now received the deference owed to one of the highest-ranking noblemen in England. The absurdity of it struck her with almost painful clarity. Nothing essential about him had changed. He had eaten the same bread with the same hands. He had possessed the same voice, the same mind, the same title, even when no one knew it. Yet one word had transformed contempt into obedience. Duke. Dorothea lowered her eyes before anyone noticed her watching. She had nearly returned to the table when Lady Marcella's voice reached her from the landing. Miss Hale. Dorothea turned. The Dowager Countess of Rotherby stood below in dove-grey silk, one hand resting lightly on the banister. She was a handsome woman in her late 50s, with silver threaded through dark hair, and the controlled expression of someone who believed disorder was a moral failing. Kersey stood beside her. The housekeeper waited several paces away. Rupert had paused near the breakfast-room doors. Dorothea curtsied. "My lady, come down." Dorothea descended. Every step felt too loud. Lady Marcella did not invite her closer. "Mr. Kersey tells me your continued presence has already encouraged gossip among the staff." Dorothea kept her hands still. "I haven't encouraged anyone to speak, my lady." "No, you have merely allowed yourself to become interesting." The insult was so carefully phrased that a careless listener might have mistaken it for wit. Dorothea had heard that sort of cruelty all her life. It was the kind that expected gratitude for not shouting. "I did not choose to become interesting," she said. Lady Marcella's gaze sharpened. Kersey looked almost satisfied. "And yet here we are, a servant who has forgotten her station, and a household forced to accommodate the consequences." Rupert did not move. Dorothea felt his attention, but she did not look at him. "I remember my station very well, my lady. Do you?" "Every day." The housekeeper glanced down. Kersey's mouth tightened. Lady Marcella stepped closer. "Then remember that service depends upon trust." "Yes, my lady." "And discretion." "Yes, my lady." "And obedience." Dorothea met her eyes. "When the order is honest." Silence. It lasted only a breath, but it was enough. Kersey's expression hardened. Lady Marcella's face became perfectly still. Rupert looked at Dorothea, then, fully, and something unreadable passed through his eyes. Before anyone could answer, hurried footsteps sounded from the service passage. A junior footman appeared at the doorway, pale with uncertainty. He stopped when he saw the gathering. "Beg pardon, my lady." Lady Marcella turned. "What is it?" The footman swallowed. "Mr. Kersey asked for the morning plate inventory." Kersey frowned. "And there is a discrepancy, sir." No one spoke. Kersey held out his hand. "The list." The footman crossed the hall and gave it to him. Kersey scanned the page. His eyes stopped. For the first time since Dorothea had known him, he looked caught off balance, only for a second. Then his face settled again. Lady Marcella noticed. "What is missing?" Kersey folded the paper once. "It may be nothing, my lady." Rupert's gaze shifted to him. "Nothing is rarely written on an inventory." Kersey looked toward the Duke. "A small piece of plate has not been accounted for." "What piece?" Lady Marcella asked. "1 silver salt cellar." The words seemed oddly small for the effect they produced. The housekeeper drew a slow breath. Dorothea saw Kersey notice. "From which service?" Rupert asked. Kersey hesitated. The Rotherby set. Lady Marcella's expression sharpened. "With the family crest?" "Yes, my lady." "When was it last recorded?" 2 days ago." Dorothea stood very still. 2 days ago. Before the Duke's identity had been known. Before the household had begun watching itself. Kersey handed the inventory back to the footman. "It is likely a counting error." Dorothea looked at him. He had nearly dismissed her over a piece of bread that belonged to her, yet a missing silver object bearing the Rotherby crest was suddenly an error. Rupert saw it too. She knew because his gaze moved from Kersey to the inventory, then to Dorothea's face. Lady Marcella exhaled sharply. "Then recount at once, my lady, and do not allow this to become gossip." Her eyes moved to Dorothea. The meaning was clear. Dorothea felt heat rise beneath her skin. She had not spoken. She had not moved. Still, she had already been placed close enough to blame. "Miss Hale," Lady Marcella said, "you may return to your duties, and do try to remember that not every household matter requires your attention." Dorothea curtsied. "Of course, my lady." She turned toward the stairs. "Miss Hale." Rupert's voice stopped her. She looked back. His expression gave nothing away. "Have you eaten breakfast?" The question struck harder than accusation. Kersey stared. The housekeeper looked down again. Lady Marcella's mouth tightened with visible displeasure. Dorothea wished he had asked her anything else. "Not yet, Your Grace." "Why?" She could have said she was busy. She could have lied. Instead, she answered carefully. "Because the servants who were already seated had nearly finished, and I did not wish to cause another disturbance." Rupert's face changed by almost nothing. That was enough. "Eating is not a disturbance," Lady Marcella's voice cut in. "Surely Your Grace does not intend to supervise the breakfasts of my maids." Rupert looked at her. "No, I merely find it useful to notice when a household speaks often of order and quietly accepts hunger." Lady Marcella went still. Dorothea felt the words settle over the hall. He did not look at her again. He entered the breakfast room, and the doors closed behind him. Only then did Dorothea climb the stairs. Her hands were steady until she reached the upper corridor. She returned to the carved table, picked up her cloth, and tried to continue working. But something had shifted, not because a duke had defended her, not yet. Defense could be temporary, favor could turn, rank could grow bored. What unsettled her was that he had noticed what others ignored: the missing breakfast, the unpaid wages, Kersey's quick dismissal of the silver, small contradictions, dangerous contradictions. Dorothea pressed the dusting cloth flat against the polished wood and forced herself to breathe. Beneath her apron, hidden in the pocket of her dress, was a small scrap of paper. On it were 3 figures she had written before dawn. Flour delivered, flour recorded, flour distributed. The numbers did not agree. She glanced toward the empty corridor, took out the scrap, and added the date. When she lifted her head, Rupert stood at the far end of the passage. He had seen the pencil in her hand. He had seen the numbers. Dorothea froze. Then, beyond his shoulder, Kersey stepped into view and realized that the Duke had noticed too. Rupert did not ask about the scrap of paper in the corridor. That, more than any question, unsettled Dorothea. He stood at the far end of the passage, with the same stillness he had carried into the servants' entrance 2 nights before, his gaze resting briefly on the figures in her hand before shifting past her to Silas Kersey. Kersey had stopped near the stairwell. His face was composed. But Dorothea had known him too long not to recognize the slight tightening around his mouth. He had seen the Duke notice. He had also seen Dorothea fold the scrap and return it to her pocket. For one suspended moment, none of them spoke. Then Rupert inclined his head and continued down the corridor. Kersey remained where he was. Dorothea resumed dusting. Her hand moved over the polished table, though she no longer saw the wood beneath the cloth. She could feel Kersey watching her. "Miss Hale," she turned. "Mr. Kersey, you appear to have developed an interest in figures. I have always had one." "Have you?" His voice was pleasant. That made it worse. I had not realized the upper housemaids at Redmarsh were burdened with the accounts. "We aren't." "Then perhaps you should confine yourself to the duties for which you are paid." Dorothea almost answered that payment was precisely the problem, but she stopped herself. Kersey's eyes narrowed as though he had heard the unsaid words anyway. "The silver has not yet been found," he said. "I know. Do you? The whole household knows. Then you will understand why private scribblings may encourage unfortunate suspicions." Dorothea held his gaze. Numbers are not suspicious merely because someone writes them down. Something cold passed through his expression. "That depends entirely upon the numbers." He walked away before she could reply. Dorothea remained still until his footsteps disappeared. Only then did she breathe properly again. By late morning, a message came through the housekeeper that His Grace wished to speak with her in the morning room. Dorothea's first instinct was refusal. A maid did not simply decline a duke, but the thought came anyway. She had no desire to become a curiosity examined between breakfast and luncheon, yet, when she reached the morning room, the door stood open. Rupert's valet, Pritchard, was in the adjoining hall arranging correspondence on a side table. The choice was deliberate. Dorothea understood it at once. Rupert had not summoned her into secrecy. He had made certain no one could credibly accuse her of impropriety. That small consideration disturbed her more deeply than grander gestures might have done. Rupert stood beside the window, one hand resting on the back of a chair. "Miss Hale, Your Grace," she curtsied, "you need not look as though I have called you here for sentencing. I wasn't aware that I did. You do. Then I shall try to appear more cheerful." "Please don't. It would be alarming." The answer escaped her before she could stop it. To her surprise, the corner of his mouth shifted. "There. That is better." Dorothea lowered her eyes. "You wished to speak with me." "I did." He glanced toward her pocket. "About the figures you were writing this morning." Her shoulders stiffened. "Mr. Kersey has already spoken to me about them." "I am not Mr. Kersey." "No," she looked up. "You aren't." Silence settled between them. Rupert did not fill it. He waited. That, too, was unusual. Men in authority often mistook delay for disobedience. Rupert seemed willing to let her decide what came next. Dorothea slowly reached into her pocket and removed the scrap. "These are only 3 figures. I saw that. They concern flour. I suspected they were not poetry." She gave him a brief look. He almost smiled again. Then his expression became serious. "May I see them?" Dorothea hesitated. The scrap was not dangerous by itself, yet the habit behind it was. "Why?" "Because you noticed a discrepancy before I knew there was one to notice. That doesn't mean I understand it." "No, but it means you were looking." He extended his hand, then stopped before taking the paper. "May I?" The question was simple. Dorothea had not expected it. She placed the scrap in his palm. Flour delivered, she said. Flour recorded. Flour distributed. Rupert read the figures. They do not agree. No. By how much? Enough that it isn't likely to be an error. How long has this been happening? Dorothea felt the room grow smaller. Pritchard remained visible in the hall. Beyond him, a footman passed with a tray and continued without looking in. She could still leave with nothing more than an uncomfortable conversation behind her. Then she remembered Kersey's hand reaching for the breadcloth. She remembered 3 weeks of unpaid wages. She remembered 2 kitchen girls whispering about portions cut again. Several months, she said. Rupert's gaze lifted. You are certain? No. His expression changed slightly. She continued before he could speak. I am certain that the figures have been wrong several times. I am not certain why. Those are different things. Something in his face sharpened with approval. You distinguish between suspicion and proof. A servant who doesn't learn that difference can be ruined by either. Rupert folded the scrap once, carefully. How do you know the figures? I listen. I count. I remember. And you write them down. Dorothea said nothing. Rupert looked at her for a long moment. There is more than this scrap. It was not a question. Her fingers tightened at her sides. Yes, where? With me. He did not ask to have it brought immediately. What is it? A notebook. Of household accounts. No mine. The word came out more sharply than she intended. Rupert did not take offense. Your notebook, he said. What is in it? Dates. Quantities, when I could be certain of them. Wages delayed. Rations reduced. Sometimes the names of those affected. And you have kept this secretly, quietly. Is there a difference? There is to people who have no power. Rupert went still. Dorothea regretted the words only because they were true. He returned the scrap. Their fingers nearly touched. Dorothea drew her hand back first. The movement was small, but both of them noticed it. Will you show me the notebook? He asked. She looked at him. Will you take it if I refuse? No. Even if you believe it matters? Yes. Why? Because it is yours. The answer was immediate. Dorothea had no defense prepared for that. She had expected persuasion, authority, perhaps a reminder that he was trying to help. Instead, he simply waited. She slipped the scrap back into her pocket. It is upstairs, then I can wait. You don't understand. Probably not. If Mr. Kersey learns I have been recording shortages, I may not merely lose my place. He could say I altered the figures, or stole from the house, or conspired with another servant. He could say anything. And would Lady Marcella believe him? Dorothea did not answer. She did not need to. Rupert's expression hardened. I see. No, Your Grace. You are beginning to. That earned another silence. Not offended, thoughtful. Dorothea left the room and climbed to the attic. She retrieved the small notebook from beneath folded linen in her trunk. Keeping the embroidered breadcloth where it was, the notebook was plain, worn at the corners, and small enough to fit beneath her apron. When she returned, Pritchard was still in the adjacent hall. Rupert had not moved far from the window. Dorothea held the notebook, but did not offer it immediately. This is not proof of theft. I know. It does not prove Mr. Kersey has done anything. I know. It may prove nothing, except that I dislike unanswered numbers. That would still tell me something about you. Dorothea frowned. What? That you notice what everyone else finds convenient not to notice. The words struck too close. She lowered her gaze. Then she held out the notebook. Rupert took it only after she released it. He turned the first page. Dates, flour, coal, meat, soap, candle ends. Wages delayed by 1 week, then 2, then 3. names written only where Dorothea had heard the person speak directly. No rumours marked as facts, no accusation without a source. Rupert read several pages in silence. The deeper he went, the colder his expression became. "Who taught you to keep accounts?" he asked. "My father kept books for a draper before he died." "And you learned from him?" "Enough to know that numbers can lie when people arrange them carefully." Rupert closed the notebook. "May I have this copied?" Dorothea's hand tightened. "Not yet." He returned it immediately. No argument, no disappointment performed for her benefit. "Very well." She took it. Again their hands came close. Again neither touched the other. "What will you do?" she asked. "Check one figure at a time." "Quietly?" "For now." Dorothea slipped the notebook beneath her apron. "Mr. Kersey already suspects something." "Yes." Rupert looked toward the open doorway. "And I suspect he has just realized I know that." As if summoned by the words, Kersey appeared at the end of the hall. He approached with measured steps, his face composed. His gaze moved from Rupert to Dorothea, then briefly to the place beneath her apron where the notebook rested. He could not know what was there. "Not yet. Your Grace," he said. "Miss Hale." Dorothea waited. Kersey folded his hands behind his back. "As the missing silver salt cellar has still not been recovered, I have ordered a formal search of the servants' trunks tomorrow." Dorothea felt the blood drain from her face. Rupert did not move. Kersey inclined his head. "Naturally, I am sure no innocent person has anything to fear. Something went wrong while generating the response. If this issue persists, please contact us through our help center at help.my.com. Thulai. By the 6th day, Rupert had learned that the most dangerous lies at Redmarsh Hall were not spoken aloud. They were entered neatly in columns. The housekeeper's ration records lay open on the morning room table, beneath a cold shaft of October light. Their pages ruled in faded ink and filled with quantities that had once seemed too ordinary to deserve suspicion. Flour, coal, meat, soap, candles. The materials by which a large household survived without ever troubling its guests with the effort of survival. Rupert stood over the ledger while Pritchard remained in the adjoining hall, sorting correspondence within sight of the open door. On the previous afternoon, Rupert's solicitor had compared several household summaries with supplier bills already kept at Redmarsh, and found one discrepancy large enough to resist the comfortable explanation of clerical error. Now Rupert had chosen one of Dorothea's figures and gone backward through the records himself. He did not want belief, he wanted proof. The figure concerned flour. According to the supplier's bill, 20 sacks had arrived during a particular delivery. According to the housekeeper's record, 18 had been received for household use. According to Dorothea's private tally, kitchen portions had then been reduced, as though only 16 had ever existed. 2 sacks might be dismissed as carelessness. 4 sacks, divided among several records, became something else. Rupert looked again at the dates. He had once spent hours listening to estate stewards explain drought, rents, drainage, timber, and wheat prices. Numbers did not frighten him. What disturbed him was the precision with which they could be made respectable. A soft knock sounded against the open door. Dorothea stood in the passage, hands folded before her apron. "You asked for me, Your Grace." "I did." His eyes went briefly to Pritchard, making certain the valet was still visible. Dorothea noticed. She always noticed. "Come no farther than you wish," Rupert said. "I only need to ask you about one figure." She stepped to the threshold, but did not enter fully. The distance between them was perhaps 12 feet, enough for propriety. Enough, he suspected, for her to feel that she still possessed a choice. "The flower?" she asked. Rupert looked at her sharply. "How did you know? You have the housekeeper's ration book open to the week beginning the 5th of September. And that was the first time I wrote down a shortage large enough that I thought I might have counted wrongly." "Did you?" "No," her answer came without triumph. Rupert respected that more than certainty performed for effect. He turned the ledger toward her without asking her to cross the room. The supplier records 20 sacks delivered. The housekeeper records 18 received. Your tally suggests kitchen portions were cut as though 16 were available. Dorothea's expression became still. "Yes." "How did you know the kitchen portions had changed?" "Because bread became thinner at the servants' table. Porridge was stretched with more water. 2 kitchen maids complained that flour intended for pastry had been locked away. But I did not write that down because I didn't hear the instruction myself." Rupert studied her. "You leave out what you cannot verify. I try to, even when it supports what you suspect, especially then." Silence settled. Rupert looked back at the ledger. One of the things he had begun to understand about Dorothea was that she had survived by refusing herself the luxury of careless conclusions. A gentleman might make an accusation and later call it an error. A maid could lose her livelihood before anyone admitted the difference. "The formal search, Mr. Kersey announced, has not yet taken place," Rupert said. Her shoulders tightened slightly. "No. Lady Marcella postponed it while the plate inventory was counted again." "At your request?" "At my insistence that missing silver should not become an excuse for disorder disguised as justice." Dorothea lowered her eyes. "Mr. Kersey won't forget that. Neither will I." She looked up. The answer held more than he intended. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Rupert closed the ledger. "There is something else I need to ask. You once said Kersey might accuse you of stealing, altering figures, or conspiring with another servant. Was that only fear?" Dorothea did not answer at once. Pritchard moved a stack of letters in the hall. Somewhere beyond him, a servant crossed the corridor and disappeared. The ordinary sounds of the house continued. Dorothea's silence did not. "No," she said. Rupert waited. "Several weeks ago, I saw Mr. Kersey leaving the attic corridor. Where the servants sleep. Yes. Is that unusual? For the housekeeper, no. For Mr. Kersey, yes. He has authority over the household accounts and staff, but he does not inspect maids' trunks or rooms without cause." Rupert's expression hardened. "What day?" "The 29th of September." "You are certain?" "I wrote it down that evening." "Why?" "Because he was carrying nothing when he entered the passage. But when he left, he had one hand inside his coat." Rupert said nothing. Dorothea continued quickly. "That proves nothing. I know. He may have had a letter, keys, papers, anything. I know, and I never saw him enter my room." "Dorothea." She stopped. It was the first time he had used her given name without the shield of Miss Hale. He seemed to realize it only after the sound had left his mouth. She did. A faint change touched her face, then vanished. Rupert chose his next words carefully. "You do not have to argue against yourself every time you tell me something true. Someone must." "Why?" "Because if I do not, another person will do it for me and call it reason." The words landed with quiet force. Rupert leaned one hand against the table. "What frightens you most?" She almost smiled, but there was no amusement in it. "You ask direct questions for a duke. Most people are too polite to answer indirect ones honestly. And if I don't wish to answer, then you don't." She studied him as though testing the promise. At last, She looked toward the empty passage beyond Pritchard. Losing my place isn't what frightens me most. What does? Being the only person who says something is wrong, and then being told that, my saying it is the wrong. Rupert felt something cold settle beneath his ribs. He remembered Kersey calling her insolent. Lady Marcella accusing her of forgetting her station, the missing wages, the reduced rations. The silver salt cellar still unaccounted for. You think Kersey will make you the problem. I think people prefer a troublesome maid to a troublesome truth. Rupert looked at her for a long moment. You will not be questioned alone by him. Dorothea's mouth tightened. That sounds very much like an order. It is one, to him. Something in her expression shifted. Not to me. No. What if I choose to speak to him? Then Pritchard or the housekeeper will remain within hearing. And if I refuse both? Rupert hesitated. He knew the answer that power wanted to give. He chose another. Then I will dislike it very much and respect your decision. Dorothea looked almost startled. The distance between them had not changed. Yet the room seemed suddenly more intimate. Rupert had been thanked by tenants, praised in Parliament, courted by families who wanted his name attached to theirs. None of it felt as consequential as the slight easing of Dorothea's shoulders. What do you want? He asked. Not from Redmarsh, not from me. If you could choose freely, what would you want? She looked at him as if no one had ever asked the question without already deciding the answer. To leave without being called a thief. Rupert felt the words more sharply than he expected. He had imagined safety, wages, a reference, perhaps another position. Her ambition was smaller and more devastating. To leave with her own name intact. That is not too much to ask, he said. It is when someone powerful needs you to be guilty. Before Rupert could answer, footsteps approached. Silas Kersey appeared at the far end of the hall. He saw Dorothea at the threshold. He saw the open ration ledger. His face did not change, but his pace slowed once. Rupert noticed. So did Dorothea. Kersey stopped several feet from Pritchard. Your Grace. Mr. Kersey. Miss Hale. Dorothea inclined her head. Kersey clasped his hands behind his back. The final recount of the Rotherby plate has been completed. Rupert waited. The silver salt cellar remains missing. Dorothea went very still. Kersey continued. Lady Marcella has therefore authorized the formal search that was postponed. Every servant's trunk will be opened tomorrow morning in the presence of witnesses. His eyes rested on Dorothea. Naturally, no innocent person has anything to fear. Rupert looked at Kersey and understood, with sudden certainty, that the man expected something to be found. The search began after formal dinner, when the guests of Redmarsh Hall were still drinking wine upstairs, and the servants below had not yet finished clearing the last of the silver from the table. Dorothea knew at once that the timing had been chosen carefully. A morning search might have remained a private household matter. An evening search, with carriages waiting in the courtyard and neighbouring families still beneath Lady Marcella's roof, carried another possibility. Spectacle. She stood in the attic corridor with the housekeeper, Silas Kersey, 2 witnesses from the senior staff, and 3 other maids whose trunks were to be opened before hers. Rupert was not present. That fact should have made no difference. It did. Dorothea hated herself for noticing. The housekeeper unlocked the first trunk. Linen, 2 dresses, letters tied with ribbon. Nothing. The second held stockings, a prayer book, and a small tin of hairpins. The third contained no silver either. Kersey said very little. He watched. That was worse. Dorothea felt the embroidered breadcloth folded beneath her spare shift. in her own trunk. She felt the private tally notebook resting beneath the clothes she had packed and repacked after being told she might leave without a reference. Everything she possessed could fit into that one wooden box. It seemed suddenly indecent that strangers would open it under accusation. "Miss Hale," Kersey said. The corridor went quiet. Dorothea stepped forward. Her trunk sat beneath the small window at the end of the room. The key hung from a narrow cord beneath her apron. She drew it out herself. "Allow me," Kersey said. Dorothea looked at him. "It is my key, and this is a formal search. Then I shall unlock it formally." The housekeeper's mouth tightened, perhaps to hide approval. Kersey's eyes cooled. Dorothea knelt and placed the key in the lock. Her hands were steady. She was grateful for that. The lid opened. Folded linen, 2 serviceable gowns, a comb missing 3 teeth, the embroidered breadcloth with its faded green wheat. Her notebook. Nothing more. Dorothea almost breathed. Then Kersey reached beneath the folded linen at the rear of the trunk. The world changed in one movement. Silver caught the candlelight. No one spoke. Kersey lifted the small salt cellar between 2 fingers. The Rotherby crest gleamed on its side. The housekeeper whispered, "Dear God." Dorothea did not understand what she was seeing. She knew the object. She had heard of its disappearance. She had watched the household grow nervous around it, but she had never touched it, never seen it in her room, never placed it beneath her linen. Kersey looked at her with something close to pity. "Miss Hale." Her mouth had gone dry. "I didn't put it there. It was found in your locked trunk. I can see where it was found. Then perhaps you would like to explain." Dorothea rose slowly. "I can't explain what I didn't do." One of the witnesses shifted. The other looked away. The housekeeper stared at the salt cellar as if willing it to become something else. Kersey's voice softened. "You understand the seriousness of this? Yes. Theft from your employer. Household silver bearing the family crest. I know what it is, and still you deny it." Dorothea looked directly at him. "I did not put it there." The words were not loud. They did not shake. She would remember that later. She would remember having so little left except the truth and refusing to surrender even the sound of it. Footsteps came quickly along the corridor. Pritchard appeared first. Rupert followed. The sight of him sent a painful flicker of relief through Dorothea before she could stop it. His face changed when he saw the silver in Kersey's hand. Not disbelief, not certainty. Calculation. That hurt more than she expected. "What happened?" Rupert asked. Kersey inclined his head. "The missing salt cellar has been recovered, Your Grace." "From where?" "Miss Hale's trunk." Silence. Rupert looked at Dorothea. She held his gaze. "I did not put it there." He said nothing for one terrible second. Then 2. "Who opened the trunk?" he asked. "Miss Hale unlocked it herself." The housekeeper answered. "Who searched it?" "Mr. Kersey." Rupert's eyes moved to him. Who witnessed the discovery? The 2 senior servants gave their names. Rupert turned to Pritchard. "Take possession of the object." Kersey stiffened. "Your Grace, this is Rotherby property, and it has become evidence in an accusation serious enough to ruin a woman's life." His voice remained quiet. "Pritchard." The valet stepped forward. Kersey hesitated, then placed the salt cellar into his hand. Rupert said, "Lock it in the study cabinet. Keep the key on your person." "Yes, Your Grace." Pritchard left with the silver. Dorothea watched him go. One object, one possessor, one locked destination. At least something in the room had become orderly. "Miss Hale will not be questioned alone," Rupert said. Kersey's mouth tightened. "Surely the matter is plain." "Then it will remain plain under witnesses." Lady Marcella must be informed. She will be. Dorothea saw the decision pass through Kersey's face before he spoke. I believe her ladyship is already in the drawing-room. Rupert's expression hardened. Then we will speak there. Dorothea knew at once what that meant. Upstairs, guests, eyes, rumour with a heartbeat. Your Grace, she said. He looked at her. I don't want to be paraded through the house. Nor do I. Then stop this here. Before he could answer, Lady Marcella's voice came from the stairwell. Too late. She entered the corridor with all the dignity of a woman arriving for judgment rather than scandal. I have already been informed. Her gaze settled on Dorothea. Come downstairs. Rupert stepped between them with no haste at all. No public accusation will be made until the facts are examined. Lady Marcella looked at him coldly. The object was found in her trunk. That is one fact. What more do you require? The truth. Lady Marcella's expression changed by barely anything. Then let us hear it. The drawing-room contained 11 guests when Dorothea entered. Conversation died almost at once. She understood then that Lady Marcella had already prepared the stage. 2 ladies near the fireplace looked openly curious. A gentleman beside the mantel frowned. Dorothea stood near the door in her service dress while Rupert remained several feet away, close enough to intervene and far enough not to shield her from sight. Lady Marcella faced the room. A regrettable household matter has occurred. Rupert cut in. A household accusation. Every head turned toward him. Lady Marcella continued. The missing Rotherby salt cellar was found this evening in Miss Hale's locked trunk. A murmur moved through the room. Dorothea felt it touch her skin like cold air. She did not lower her head. Lady Marcella turned to her. Do you deny it? I deny stealing it. It was found among your possessions. Yes. You expect us to believe someone placed it there? Dorothea looked at her. I expect nothing from people who have already decided. Rupert's gaze sharpened. One of the ladies near the fire inhaled softly. Lady Marcella's face hardened. Insolence, even now. Truth is not made insolent because you dislike who speaks it. Kersey stepped forward. Your Grace, surely the local magistrate should be informed. Not tonight, Rupert said. She should be dismissed immediately. Lady Marcella replied. No. Rupert's answer was absolute. She will not be cast into the rain, questioned in private, or handed over to anyone until the evidence is examined. Dorothea looked at him. The room seemed to disappear around them. She did not need shelter. She needed something else. 1 sentence, 3 words, perhaps, I believe you. Rupert looked back at her and she knew he understood. That made what followed worse. Your Grace, Dorothea said, do you believe I stole it? Silence filled the drawing-room. Rupert's jaw tightened. I believe the matter requires investigation. The words were reasonable, careful, just. They broke something. Anyway, Dorothea stood very still. Lady Marcella almost smiled. Kersey did not need to. Rupert took 1 step toward her. Dorothea. She lifted her chin. No. He stopped. I have prevented a conclusion from being forced upon you. You have prevented punishment, for now that is necessary. Is it? Her voice remained quiet. Because I can't tell whether I am protected, Your Grace, or merely contained. No one in the room moved. Rupert had no answer ready. Dorothea realized that was answer enough. Dorothea did not sleep. By dawn, the accusation had settled over Redmarsh Hall like smoke, entering rooms before she did, and lingering after she left. No one said thief to her face. They did not need to. A scullery maid stopped speaking when Dorothea entered the passage. One of the footmen moved aside too quickly. The housekeeper, who had known her for years, looked at her with sorrow so carefully controlled that it hurt more than suspicion would have done. Dorothea understood what evidence did to people. It relieved them of the burden of courage. A silver salt cellar bearing the Rotherby crest had been found in her locked trunk. The object itself had been taken by Pritchard and secured in the study cabinet under Rupert's order. Dorothea had watched that transfer happen. She knew where the silver was now. She also knew that truth did not become easier merely because its location was orderly. Her own possessions had been returned to the trunk. The embroidered breadcloth lay folded beneath her spare shift. The private tally notebook remained hidden beneath the clothes, still hers, still untouched. She stood before the small attic window as the first grey light spread across the roofline, and thought of the question she had asked Rupert the night before. "Am I protected, Your Grace, or merely contained?" He had not answered. That silence had followed her upstairs. A knock sounded at the door. Dorothea turned. The housekeeper entered alone. "His Grace wishes to speak with you." Dorothea's stomach tightened. "Where?" "The morning room." "Is the door open?" The housekeeper looked at her for a moment. "Yes." Dorothea nodded. "Then I will come." Rupert was standing beside the cold fireplace when she entered. Pritchard remained visible in the adjacent hall. The arrangement was familiar now, and Dorothea found that familiarity more painful than reassuring. Rupert looked tired, not physically diminished, but stripped of the composure that usually made him difficult to read. He waited until she stopped at the threshold. "The salt cellar is still locked in the study cabinet," he said. She had not expected him to begin there. "I know. Pritchard has the key. I know that too. No one has touched it since." Dorothea looked at him. "You are telling me where the evidence is?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because you should not have to wonder whether it has moved." Something inside her softened despite herself. She disliked that. "Thank you." Rupert inclined his head. "There has been no formal charge. Not yet. I will not allow Kersey to question you alone. You already said that, and I meant it." "I know." He stopped. Dorothea could see the difficulty in him now. Rupert Northcote, Duke of Calderwick, was accustomed to solving problems by deciding where power should be placed. She had become the first problem that could not be solved that way without turning care into another form of control. "I have an alternative," he said. Dorothea's shoulders tightened. "What kind of alternative?" "You may leave Redmarsh temporarily under the protection of my household until the investigation is complete." She stared at him. "Under your protection?" "Yes, at Calderwick Park, or another residence if you would prefer. You would have your own room, proper female attendants, privacy, and no obligation to serve." He spoke carefully, as if each safeguard might prove the fairness of the offer. Dorothea heard something else. A life arranged for her. A safer cage, perhaps, but still one built by another person's authority. "And what would people say?" she asked. Rupert's expression hardened. "I do not care." "I do." He went still. "Dorothea." A former maid accused of stealing silver leaves the house of her employer and enters the household of an unmarried duke who has defended her publicly. Do you truly believe no one would invent a reason? Then let them. Easy words from a man whose name grows larger under scandal. That struck him. She saw it. Rupert looked away briefly, then back. "You are right." Dorothea had prepared herself to argue. His surrender of the point left her without the anger she needed. "I am not refusing because I think you mean harm. I know." "Do you?" "Yes." His voice lowered. "That may be worse." Silence passed between them. Dorothea looked toward the open door, and Pritchard beyond it. "You asked me once what I wanted. To leave without being called a thief." Yes, I remember. Then let me leave. Rupert's face changed. Now, today, without a reference. I was told I would have none before any silver was found. You have nowhere prepared. My aunt lives 5 miles east of Redmarsh. 5 miles. A carrier's cart passes the lower road before noon. The roads are still poor from the rain. They are not impassable. He said nothing. Dorothea watched him fight the instinct to command. She could almost see the order forming behind his eyes. Stay. Wait. Let me decide what is safe. Instead, he took one slow breath. You intend to go whether I approve or not. Yes. And if I ask you to reconsider, I will listen. And then, I will still go. For the first time since she had known him, Rupert almost laughed. There was no humor in it, only surrender. You are infuriating, so I have been told. Frequently, I imagine, only by people who prefer agreement. His gaze held hers. Then he nodded. Very well. The words cost him something. Dorothea heard it. You will not be stopped. She swallowed. Thank you. Do not thank me for respecting a choice that was always yours. The answer struck more deeply than he could have known. Dorothea lowered her eyes. I should pack. Yes, she turned. Dorothea. She stopped. Rupert stood exactly where he had been, but something in his restraint had changed. I should have answered you last night. Her fingers tightened against her skirt. Perhaps. I thought preventing punishment was enough. It wasn't. I know. She looked at him then. He did not defend himself. He did not tell her she had misunderstood. He only stood with the discomfort of having failed in the precise way he had believed he was helping. Goodbye, Your Grace, she said. Not command that either. His mouth tightened. No, I cannot. Dorothea went upstairs for the last time as a servant of Redmarsh Hall. She packed slowly. 2 gowns, 1 pair of serviceable boots, the comb with 3 missing teeth, her private tally notebook, wrapped in plain linen and placed beneath her clothes, the embroidered breadcloth folded separately and tucked beside it. Nothing else belonged to her. She changed out of her service dress and put on her plain brown gown. Then she folded the white, uniform cap that had marked her place in the household and carried it downstairs with the ring of household keys she had been temporarily allowed to retain after her first threatened dismissal. The housekeeper waited near the servants' passage. Dorothea placed the keys in her palm. All 7, she said. The housekeeper counted them once. All 7. Dorothea held out the folded cap. The older woman took it, then unexpectedly closed her fingers around Dorothea's hand. I am sorry. Dorothea looked at her. For what? The housekeeper's eyes shone, but she did not cry. For not knowing how to stand beside you without risking everyone beneath me. Dorothea understood too well to be cruel. Then stand beside the next one sooner. The housekeeper nodded once. That was all. Outside, the carrier's cart waited at the lower road, its driver hunched against the cold. Dorothea placed her trunk behind the seat and climbed in. No one had formally charged her. No magistrate had been summoned. Nothing prevented her from leaving. Still, as Redmarsh Hall receded behind the hedges, she knew departure would be used as evidence by those who wanted guilt to be simple. Lady Marcella would call it flight. Kersey would call it fear. By evening, neighboring houses might hear that the accused maid had fled. Dorothea sat upright as the cart jolted over the wet road. 5 miles east, her aunt's cottage waited. In her trunk were the notebook and the breadcloth. At Redmarsh, the silver salt cellar remained locked in the study cabinet under Pritchard's key. Behind her, Rupert stood at an upper window and watched the cart disappear. He had not stopped her. It was the first protection he had given her, that she had not needed to escape. By the second morning at her aunt's cottage, Dorothea had discovered that freedom could feel almost as uncertain as dismissal. The cottage stood 5 miles east of Redmarsh Hall, beyond a narrow lane bordered by wet hedges and low fields washed pale by October rain. It was small, warm, and honest. Nothing in it pretended to be grander than it was. Her aunt kept 2 hens, a vegetable patch already thinning toward winter, and a front room where the fire smoked whenever the wind turned. Dorothea should have felt safe there. Instead, every knock at the door made her wonder whether it carried news from Redmarsh, from a neighbouring household, or from someone who had already heard Lady Marcella's version of the truth. That version travelled quickly. By the afternoon of Dorothea's first full day away, a woman from the next parish had told her aunt that Redmarsh Hall had dismissed a maid under suspicion of theft. By evening, the story had grown. Dorothea had not merely been suspected, she had fled. The Duke of Calderwick had interfered. Silver had been found. There had been a scene before guests. In one telling, Dorothea had confessed. In another, she had attempted to charm a duke into protecting her. Facts were slow. Shame was efficient. Dorothea said little. Her private tally notebook remained in her trunk beneath folded linen. The embroidered breadcloth lay beside it, untouched. The silver salt cellar remained at Redmarsh, locked in the study cabinet under Pritchard's key. Dorothea knew exactly where each object was. She took comfort in that precision, because so little else in her life seemed fixed. On the morning of the second day, her aunt entered the small kitchen with a letter in hand. A boy brought this from the lower road. Dorothea looked up from the cup she was washing. For me, no. For you to hear, I think. Her aunt handed it over. The note bore no crest. The handwriting was firm and unfamiliar. It was from Rupert's solicitor. Dorothea read only the first lines before sitting down. Supplier invoices had been obtained from the nearby market town and compared against the internal summaries kept at Redmarsh. The discrepancies were real. Flour, coal, soap, meat. Not every figure matched her notebook exactly. But enough did. Her private tallies had not imagined a pattern. They had found one. Dorothea read the page twice. Her aunt watched her quietly. Is it good news? It is true news. That was not what I asked. Dorothea folded the letter carefully. It may become good. A carriage arrived before noon. Dorothea heard the wheels on the wet lane and knew, somehow, who it was before she looked through the window. Rupert stepped down first. Pritchard followed. He had come properly, in daylight, with his valet present and her aunt under the same roof. No whispering house could credibly turn the visit into secrecy. Dorothea hated that she noticed the care of it. She hated more that it mattered. Her aunt opened the door. Rupert bowed with the courtesy he might have offered a lady of higher rank, though the room was plain and the carpet worn. Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Bell, her aunt corrected. Dorothea was born a Hale. I married badly enough to earn another name. Rupert's mouth almost moved. Then I stand corrected, Mrs. Bell. You do. Dorothea closed her eyes for one brief second. Of course, he had found the only woman in Hampshire less impressed by dukes than she was. Her aunt stepped aside. Come in, then. You are letting the heat out. Rupert entered. Pritchard remained near the open doorway to the front room, plainly visible. Dorothea stood by the table. She did not curtsy immediately. Then habit one. Your Grace. Rupert's gaze rested on her, Miss Hale. The formality was almost a relief. Her aunt looked between them, understood more than Dorothea wished, and sat in the armchair beside of the fire. I am not leaving, she said, nor would I ask you to. Rupert replied. Dorothea folded her hands. Your solicitor sent word. Then you know the supplier invoices support your records. Some of them. Enough to prove that shortages were not imagined. Enough to prove a discrepancy. Rupert's expression changed slightly. You are still careful. I have more reason to be now. The words landed. He accepted them without defense. Yes, Dorothea had expected him to speak of the investigation. Instead, he said, I owe you an apology. Her aunt looked at the fire. Pritchard looked at nothing. Dorothea remained still. For which part? For deciding that keeping you within reach of my protection was the same as respecting you. She had not expected such precision. Rupert continued. I told myself I was preventing harm. I was. But I also chose the form of your safety without asking what it would cost you. Dorothea looked at him. And in the drawing room? His jaw tightened. I thought refusing a conclusion was justice. It wasn't trust. No, he said it plainly. No excuse, no appeal to reason, it wasn't. Something in Dorothea's anger shifted, which was inconvenient. Anger had been easier when he was wrong and proud of it. You could have said you believed me. Yes, you didn't. I know, and I don't forgive you because you have learned to say that. I would distrust you if you did. Her aunt made a small sound that might have been approval. Dorothea ignored it. Rupert took one step closer, then stopped well before the distance became improper. I am not here to ask you to return to Redmarsh. Good. I am not here to place you in my household. Better. I am here because your name is being damaged in public, and the correction must be public as well. Dorothea's expression hardened. Lady Marcella has begun speaking to neighboring families. Yes, she says I cannot be trusted in service. Yes, and you know this because 2 families, who expected to dine at Redmarsh, sent inquiries to my solicitor after hearing that I had interfered in the matter. Dorothea gave a bitter laugh. How fortunate that the truth became important once it touched a duke. Rupert did not flinch. I cannot undo that. No. But I can refuse to let it remain the only truth heard. She looked at him for a long moment. Why? He frowned. Why what? Why do you care so much? There it was. The question she had avoided because she feared every possible answer. Gratitude, guilt, novelty, desire, pity. Rupert did not reply quickly. When he did, his voice was lower, because on the first night, when you looked at me, you saw a hungry man. Not a title, not an opportunity, not a debt waiting to be collected. A man. Dorothea felt her breath catch. Rupert continued. And since then, I have watched everyone else explain you according to what is easiest for them. Insolent, ambitious, who's troublesome, guilty. I know now how much courage it took to keep speaking when silence would have been safer. That is not an answer. It is the truest one I have. She looked away. Her aunt rose. I shall put more water on. It was a transparent excuse, but she did not leave the room entirely. She moved to the adjoining kitchen, still within easy calling distance. Dorothea turned back to Rupert. The notebook is still mine. Yes. If your solicitor needs it, he may copy it. The original does not leave my ownership. Agreed. And nothing from it is to be presented as proof of theft. Agreed. It establishes a pattern, nothing more. She studied him. You remembered. Everything you insisted upon. Not everything. He accepted that too. Dorothea crossed to her trunk, opened it, and removed the private tally notebook from beneath the folded linen. The embroidered breadcloth remained where it was. She closed the trunk and returned. For a moment, she held the notebook against her palm. Then she offered it. Rupert did not take it immediately. Are you sure? No. His brows lifted slightly. But I am choosing. He received the notebook with both hands. No triumph, no assumption. The original will be copied and returned to you. Directly. Their fingers did not touch. Dorothea was relieved. She was disappointed by the relief. That was worse. Rupert handed the notebook to Pritchard, who placed it carefully inside a leather document case. My solicitor will copy it today and return the original tomorrow, Rupert said. And the silver? Dorothea asked. Still locked in the study cabinet. Pritchard keeps the key. Good. You should not have to wonder where it is. The words echoed his earlier promise. This time, they did not sound like control. They sounded like accountability. Rupert turned to leave. At the door, he paused. I do not expect forgiveness. Good. But I intend to earn the right to ask for it. Dorothea said nothing. He bowed to her aunt, then to Dorothea, and stepped outside. Pritchard followed. The carriage had nearly reached the end of the lane when another rider appeared from the opposite direction. A young groom from Redmarsh carrying a folded message. He drew up sharply beside the carriage and handed the note to Pritchard. Rupert read it before the wheels moved again. The message was brief. A footman had come forward in secret. He swore that on the day before the silver was found, he had seen Silas Kersey enter the attic corridor while Dorothea was serving downstairs. By the following morning, Rupert knew two things with certainty. The first was that the footman had not invented his story. The second was that Silas Kersey had counted on no one believing a servant whose testimony threatened a man of greater authority. Rupert interviewed the footman in the morning room at Redmarsh Hall, with Pritchard present and the door open. The young man was pale, nervous, and clearly regretted the courage that had brought him there. His name was Thomas Reed. He had served at Redmarsh for 2 years and understood precisely what could happen to a footman dismissed without a reference. Rupert did not reassure him with promises he could not yet guarantee. He asked questions. What did you see? Thomas swallowed. Mr. Kersey entering the attic corridor, Your Grace. When? The afternoon before the silver was found. At what hour? A little after 3. How do you know? The drawing-room bell had rung. I was carrying coal to the west passage and heard the clock strike before I reached the servants' stairs. Rupert glanced at Pritchard, who made a note. Where was Miss Hale? Downstairs, Your Grace. She was helping prepare the guest rooms after fresh linens arrived. You saw her there? Yes. Did you see Kersey enter her room? Thomas shook his head quickly. No, Your Grace. I saw him enter the attic corridor. I shouldn't claim more than that. Rupert felt a grim echo of Dorothea's discipline. Facts, not wishes dressed as proof. Did Kersey have reason to be there? Not that I know of. Was he carrying anything? Thomas hesitated. Not when I first saw him, and afterward. I only saw him come down the stairs. One hand was inside his coat. Rupert did not move. Dorothea had described the same behavior weeks earlier on a different date. One witness might be dismissed. 2 observations formed a pattern. Who controls access to the household keys? Rupert asked. Thomas looked toward the door, though Kersey was nowhere near it. Mr. Kersey has authority over the service keys, Your Grace. The housekeeper keeps many of them, but Mr. Kersey can order them issued. Could he obtain access to the servants' rooms? Yes. Could he do so without Miss Hale knowing? Thomas lowered his eyes. Yes. Rupert dismissed him, only after arranging that the young man would not return to duty under Kersey's direct supervision that day. It was not justice yet. It was prevention. Rupert had begun to understand the difference. By noon, his solicitor had confirmed that the external supplier invoices supported several of Dorothea's tallies. Pritchard had also returned her original notebook directly to her aunt's cottage after copies were made, exactly as promised. The silver salt cellar remained locked in the study cabinet. Pritchard still carried the key. Nothing had moved without record. Nothing had become more certain than the evidence allowed. Yet the shape of the truth was emerging. Dorothea's figures showed repeated shortages. External invoices confirmed discrepancies. Kersey had access to household keys. He had been seen in the attic corridor while Dorothea was elsewhere. The salt cellar had then appeared inside her locked trunk. Rupert was studying that chain when Lady Marcella entered the morning room without announcement. "I understand you have been questioning my servants." Rupert closed the paper before him. "I have been questioning witnesses. You are a guest in my house." "Yes, then perhaps you have forgotten that Redmarsh is not Calderwick Park." "I have forgotten nothing." Lady Marcella's mouth tightened. "This has gone far enough. The county gathering is tomorrow, and already 3 families have sent inquiries about the scandal. Then perhaps you should answer them truthfully. The truth is that a missing piece of silver was found in a maid's trunk. That is one fact. It is the fact society will remember." Rupert rose. "Only if you make certain they hear nothing else." Her silence told him he had struck close. He continued, "Did you authorize servants' wages to be withheld?" Lady Marcella's expression became still. "Temporary financial measures are not your concern. They became my concern when one of those servants was threatened with dismissal for asking why she had not been paid. Miss Hale has made herself useful to you." The contempt beneath the words was polished but unmistakable. Rupert felt his anger cool. "Be careful." "Why?" "Because she fed you once. Because you continue to mistake rank for moral authority." Lady Marcella went pale. Then her chin lifted. "Tomorrow, I shall make the matter clear before any more rumors spread. I will inform the county guests that Miss Hale was dismissed under suspicion of theft. That is accurate." Rupert stared at her. She left voluntarily, after silver was found in her trunk. Before any formal charge, society will decide what distinction matters. "No," Rupert said. "You will." She frowned. "What?" "You will choose whether to present suspicion as guilt. You will choose whether to use your rank to close a servant's future before the evidence is tested. And if you do, I will choose what I do with the truth afterward." "Is that a threat?" "No, it is clarity." Lady Marcella looked at him for a long moment. "You would fracture county society over a maid." Rupert thought of Dorothea dividing her last bread in the rain. He thought of her saying she wanted only to leave without being called a thief. "No," he said, "you would." Lady Marcella left without another word. By late afternoon, the damage had already begun. Word reached the cottage through a neighboring family that preparations for the county gathering at Redmarsh were accompanied by a carefully phrased explanation from Lady Marcella. Dorothea Hale had been dismissed following the discovery of missing silver among her possessions. No formal accusation was mentioned. No evidence beyond the salt cellar was acknowledged. No one spoke of unpaid wages or altered accounts. The lie was effective because most of it was made from facts stripped of context. Rupert arrived at the cottage before dusk. He came with Pritchard, as before. Mrs. Bell remained in the front room, knitting near the fire, with the severe attention of a woman who considered dukes a temporary inconvenience. Dorothea stood near the window. Her private notebook rested safely in her trunk again. The embroidered breadcloth remained beside it. Rupert told her what Lady Marcella intended. Dorothea listened without interrupting. When he finished, She looked out at the darkening lane. So she has chosen guilt for me. She has chosen a version of events that serves her. That is how. Guilt is often chosen for people without power. Rupert had no answer that would not insult her intelligence. Thomas Reed has come forward, he said. Dorothea turned. The footman? Yes, he saw Kersey enter the attic corridor the afternoon before the silver was found. You were downstairs. Hope appeared in her face and was suppressed almost immediately. Did he see Kersey enter my room? No. Did he see him carrying the salt cellar? No. Rupert respected her for asking the questions that weakened her own case, but he confirms Kersey had opportunity. My solicitor has also verified that Kersey could obtain access to the household keys. Dorothea was silent. That is still not proof, he planted it. No, good. Rupert almost smiled. You sound disappointed that I agree. I am learning not to trust easy agreement. A useful habit. She looked at him then. Will you still speak when the truth embarrasses people of your own rank? The question landed harder than accusation. Rupert understood what she was asking, not whether he would defend her in private, not whether he would order servants to protect her or solicitors to investigate. She was asking whether his courage would survive a crowded room. Lady Marcella wants the matter kept private except for the version she controls, he said. Dorothea's face closed slightly. Then you have answered. No. Rupert took one step closer and stopped. I have ended that arrangement. She stared at him. What arrangement? The expectation that this would be handled discreetly to preserve Redmarsh's reputation. You agreed to that? At first, I believed a quiet investigation would protect the evidence. And now I know private truth cannot repair public ruin. Dorothea said nothing. Rupert continued. If the accusation was public, the correction will be public. If the evidence embarrasses Lady Marcella, Kersey, or every gentleman who found silence convenient, then they will be embarrassed. Her expression shifted, but he did not mistake it for forgiveness. You make it sound simple. It is not. Then why do it? Rupert met her eyes. Because I should have stood beside your word before the room taught me how convenient doubt can be. The fire cracked softly behind them. Mrs. Bell stopped knitting, but did not look up. Dorothea's voice, when it came, was quiet. I am going back. Rupert went still. To Redmarsh? Yes. Why? Because I will not let you tell my truth for me either. For one heartbeat, the old instinct rose in him, to object, to warn, to protect by deciding. He let it die. When? He asked. Tomorrow. Rupert nodded once. Then tomorrow you will choose where you stand. Dorothea held his gaze. And so will you. Dorothea returned to Redmarsh Hall the next morning by choice. And that made all the difference. She did not arrive in service dress. She wore her plain brown gown, her best wool cloak, and the same boots that had carried her away 2 days before. Her private tally notebook rested inside a small reticule at her side. The original had been returned to her exactly as promised after Rupert's solicitor made copies. The embroidered breadcloth remained safely at her aunt's cottage. The silver salt cellar remained locked in the study cabinet at Redmarsh, under Pritchard's key. Nothing had moved without record. Nothing had been restored by miracle. Nothing had become proof merely because someone powerful wished it so. Dorothea stepped down from the hired cart at the servants' entrance and stood for one breath beneath the grey October sky. The last time she had crossed that threshold, she had been leaving with no place, no reference, and a name already being carried through neighbouring houses as something doubtful. Now she returned with evidence, witnesses, and the terrible knowledge that truth could still fail if those who heard it preferred comfort. The housekeeper met her inside. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then the older woman said, "You came back?" "Yes." "For good?" "No." Dorothea glanced toward the passage. "For the truth." The housekeeper nodded, as if that answer was enough. Rupert waited in the morning room with Pritchard, his solicitor, Thomas Reed, and the housekeeper's ration books laid open on the table. The door stood wide. Dorothea stopped at the threshold. Rupert turned when he saw her. Something moved across his face, relief perhaps, but he did not come toward her. That mattered. He waited. Dorothea entered because she chose to. "Miss Hale," the solicitor said, rising, "your original notebook was returned to you yesterday." "Yes." "Unaltered?" "Yes, and you still possess it." She opened the reticule and took out the worn little volume. "I do." The solicitor inclined his head. "Good." Dorothea looked at Rupert. "Before we begin, I want something made clear." "Say it." "This cannot end with my name being cleared while every unpaid servant remains forgotten." The room grew still. The housekeeper looked at her sharply. Thomas Reed lowered his eyes. Dorothea continued. "If the evidence shows that wages were withheld, then those wages must be accounted for. If rations were reduced while deliveries continued, that must be examined too. I will not stand before a room and prove only that I am not a thief, while everyone else beneath stairs is expected to return quietly to the same hunger." Rupert held her gaze. "Agreed." "Do not agree because it sounds noble." "I do not." "Then say what will happen." Rupert turned toward the solicitor. "The wage authorization records have been secured from the Redmarsh office. They show that payments were delayed under Lady Marcella's authority. The external supplier invoices show discrepancies between goods delivered and goods recorded for household distribution. Your tallies establish that those shortages were visible in servants' portions before anyone above stairs admitted a problem. Thomas confirms that Kersey entered the attic corridor while you were elsewhere. We also know Kersey had access to service keys." Dorothea listened without interrupting. "And the salt cellar?" she asked. "Still locked in the study cabinet," Pritchard answered. "I have the key, and no one has touched it. No one." Dorothea nodded once. Rupert continued. "The evidence does not prove every act by itself. Together, it establishes a pattern strong enough that Kersey can no longer hide behind coincidence." "And Lady Marcella?" Rupert's expression cooled. "The wage records establish that she knowingly permitted servants to go unpaid in order to preserve the household's appearance." Dorothea looked at the ration books. "Does anything prove she ordered Kersey to plant the silver?" "No." "Then we do not say she did." Rupert's gaze softened by almost nothing. "No, we do not." The solicitor began arranging documents in order. Supplier invoices, copied extracts from Dorothea's notebook, wage authorizations, the housekeeper's ration records, Thomas Reed's statement. No surprise evidence, no confession dragged from nowhere. Facts placed one beside another until the space between them narrowed. Dorothea felt fear then, not because the evidence was weak, because it was real. Real things could still be denied. Real things could ruin the wrong person if society wished to preserve the right one. A footman appeared at the open door. "My lady wishes to speak with Miss Hale." Rupert's expression hardened. Dorothea looked at him before he could answer. "I will speak with her." "You do not have to." "I know." Rupert stepped back. "Then I will not stop you." Lady Marcella waited in the drawing room, standing beneath the portrait of her late husband. She wore dark green silk and the expression of a woman who believed dignity could erase consequence. Dorothea entered alone. though the drawing-room door remained open, and the housekeeper waited within sight in the hall. Lady Marcella looked her over slowly. "So you have returned. For today. You mistake attention for power, Miss Hale." "No, my lady. I have learned the difference." Lady Marcella's mouth tightened. "Do you imagine that standing beside a duke will make county society forget what you are?" Dorothea kept her hands still. "What am I?" "A former maid accused of theft." Accused, not proved guilty. Distinctions matter little when reputation is concerned. Only to those who benefit from confusion. Lady Marcella went very still. "Be careful." Dorothea almost smiled. "I have been careful for years. And yet here you are, attaching yourself to the Duke of Calderwick." There it was. Dorothea had expected the accusation, but hearing it still stung. Lady Marcella continued. "Do you think others will not understand what you are doing? A servant receives a nobleman's attention, leaves under suspicion, then returns under his protection with documents and grievances. By tomorrow, half the county will call you an adventuress." Dorothea felt the old instinct to defend herself rise. She let it pass. Then half the county may decide whether facts become less true when spoken by a woman they dislike. You could end this now. How? Leave. Let the matter remain private. The silver need not be discussed further. Your name need not become a spectacle. Dorothea stared at her. "My name already became a spectacle when you announced the accusation before your guests." Lady Marcella's composure faltered, only slightly. "Enough. You cannot expect the world to be rearranged for your feelings. I don't." Dorothea's voice remained calm. "I expect you to answer for what was done." Silence. Lady Marcella's eyes hardened. "And if the Duke tires of this moral crusade?" Dorothea felt the question strike precisely where intended. "Then he does. You say that easily." "No, I say it because it is necessary." Lady Marcella stepped closer. "You may find that truth is a poor companion when it costs you, the only man foolish enough to forget your station." Dorothea left without answering. Rupert was waiting in the morning room when she returned. He looked at her face and knew at once that something had happened. What did she say? Dorothea placed her notebook on the table. "That society will call me an adventuress. That I have attached myself to you. That if I speak publicly, I may lose whatever place I have in your regard." Rupert's jaw tightened. She had no right. Rights have never prevented people from speaking. "Dorothea, no. Listen to me." He did. She took one breath. "If I do this, I do it knowing exactly what it may cost. My reputation is already damaged. I may never serve in another respectable house. People may decide I am ambitious, manipulative, ungrateful, or worse. And if standing beside me publicly damages you enough that you regret it, I need to know now." Rupert looked at her for a long moment. Then he asked very quietly, "What do you choose?" The question changed the room. Not what should be done, not what was safest, not what he would permit. What did she choose? Dorothea looked at the papers, at Thomas Reed waiting near the wall, at the housekeeper, whose wages had been stretched thin while silver shone upstairs. Then she looked back at Rupert. "The truth, even if it costs me you." Something in his face broke open, though his voice remained steady. "If the truth makes you lose me, then I never deserved you." Dorothea forgot how to breathe for one heartbeat. Rupert did not reach for her. He did not make a declaration the room could turn into romance before justice was done. He simply stood beside her. The solicitor gathered the documents. Pritchard brought the study key. Thomas Reed straightened despite his fear. The housekeeper lifted her chin. Beyond the corridor, voices gathered. Gentry guests, had been asked to remain after the county gathering. Senior household staff waited as witnesses. Lady Marcella had already entered the great hall. Kersey was there too. Dorothea picked up her original notebook. "I want to speak for myself." Rupert nodded. "You will, and you will not interrupt unless necessary." "Agreed. And if I become afraid," his eyes held hers, "then be afraid. You do not owe anyone fearlessness." The words settled somewhere deep. Dorothea turned toward the corridor. Together, they walked to the great hall. Rupert did not lead her. She did not follow him. At the closed doors, the footman looked from the Duke to the former maid beside him. Rupert said nothing. Dorothea gave the nod. The doors opened. The doors of the great hall opened, and for one moment, Dorothea heard nothing at all. Not the shifting of chairs, not the quiet breath of the housekeeper behind her, not the murmur that passed through the gentry guests gathered after the county meeting. She saw only the long room where she had carried trays, polished tables, and learned how easily a servant could become part of the furniture. Lady Marcella stood near the great fireplace in dark green silk. Silas Kersey was several paces away, his face composed with the careful dignity of a man who still believed appearances could outlast evidence. Thomas Reed waited near the side wall. Rupert's solicitor stood beside a table laid with documents. Pritchard remained near the study door, the key to the locked cabinet still in his possession. Rupert entered beside Dorothea, not before her. That mattered. Every eye in the room turned toward them. Lady Marcella spoke first. "Your Grace, I must object to this display." Rupert stopped. "Then object." Her mouth tightened. "A private household matter has been turned into a spectacle." Dorothea felt the words strike with almost absurd familiarity. Private when servants went unpaid, private when rations shrank, public when silver was found in her trunk. Rupert's voice remained calm. The accusation was made before guests. The correction will be heard before witnesses. A murmur moved through the room. Kersey stepped forward. "Correction assumes an error, Your Grace." Rupert looked at him. "No, it assumes only that facts should be heard before guilt is assigned." Lady Marcella lifted her chin. "The silver was found in Miss Hale's locked trunk." "Yes," Rupert said, "that is one fact." His solicitor placed the first document on the table, and now the others. Dorothea felt feather rise in her throat. Rupert glanced at her but did not speak for her. He remembered. She stepped forward on her own. "I will say this once before anything else is read." The room quieted. "I did not steal the Rotherby salt cellar. I did not place it in my trunk, and I will not ask anyone here to believe me out of pity." Kersey gave a restrained sigh. "Miss Hale, no one has suggested pity." Dorothea turned toward him. "No, only guilt." His expression hardened. The solicitor opened a folder. "The first matter concerns household supplies. External supplier invoices from the nearby market town record quantities, delivered to Redmarsh Hall over several months. Those quantities do not consistently agree with Mr. Kersey's internal distribution summaries." Kersey folded his hands behind his back. "Clerical discrepancies occur in every large household." "One, perhaps," the solicitor replied. "Several repeated discrepancies across flour, coal, soap, and meat require explanation." The housekeeper's ration books were opened beside the invoices. Dorothea placed her private tally notebook on the table herself. "These are my records," she said. "They do not prove theft. They record dates, shortages, delayed wages, and reduced rations when I could verify them." One gentleman near the fireplace frowned. "A maid kept accounts privately?" Dorothea looked at him. A maid noticed when there was less bread. The room went still. Rupert's gaze remained on her, but he did not interrupt. The solicitor continued. Miss Hale's figures do not stand alone. They correspond in multiple instances with differences between supplier invoices and internal records. Kersey's composure thinned. She could have altered her notebook after the fact. Dorothea answered before anyone else could. The notebook was copied by His Grace's solicitor before I returned to Redmarsh. The original was then returned directly to me. The dates inside include entries written before the salt cellar disappeared. The solicitor nodded. That is correct. Thomas Reed was called next. He stepped forward visibly nervous. Dorothea felt for him. Courage looked less impressive up close. It looked like pale hands and a voice that nearly shook. Tell the room what you saw, Rupert said. Thomas swallowed. On the afternoon before the silver was found, I saw Mr. Kersey enter the attic corridor. Kersey turned toward him. You saw me in a corridor. Hardly a crime. Thomas looked at Rupert, then at Dorothea, and forced himself to continue. Miss Hale was downstairs at the time. I saw her there, Mr. Kersey had access to the service keys. And did you see me enter her room? Kersey demanded. Thomas hesitated. No. Did you see me carry the salt cellar? No. Kersey looked around the room. Then this testimony proves nothing. Dorothea spoke quietly. It proves opportunity. Kersey's eyes fixed on her, and your notebook proves obsession. Rupert's voice cut through the room. Enough. Kersey turned toward him. Rupert did not raise his voice. You will not intimidate a witness because his truth is incomplete. No honest investigation requires every witness to pretend certainty. The solicitor placed another set of records on the table. We also have the household wage authorizations. Lady Marcella's face changed. Very little. Dorothea saw it anyway. The solicitor continued. These show that servants' wages were deliberately postponed under Lady Marcella's authority. The room stirred. Lady Marcella stepped forward. Temporary financial management is not theft. No, Rupert said. It is not. Dorothea looked at him. He was being exact. No exaggeration. No convenient cruelty. Rupert continued. And no one here will claim that Lady Marcella planted the salt cellar, because there is no evidence that she did. Lady Marcella stared at him, briefly startled by the fairness of the statement. However, Rupert said, the records establish that she knew servants were unpaid while maintaining the public appearance of an undisturbed household. The Dowager Countess stiffened. You dare lecture me on the management of my own estate? No, I am stating what the documents show. Kersey seized the opening, and none of these documents proves I placed silver in Miss Hale's trunk. The room quieted again. Dorothea felt the weakness in the case. Everyone did. There was no witness who had seen him with the salt cellar. No confession, no hidden letter, no miraculous final proof. Only pattern, access, motive, opportunity, and a servant's name nearly destroyed by the coincidence of an object found where it should never have been. Kersey saw the uncertainty and grew bolder. The silver was found among her possessions. That remains the clearest fact in this room. Dorothea looked at him. Then she looked at Lady Marcella. The question came not from strategy, but from hunger remembered in the body. If I stole to feed myself, my lady, why were 12 servants left unpaid while the first table grew richer? Silence. Not theatrical silence. Human silence. The kind that came when everyone understood the question and no one wanted the answer. Lady Marcella's face lost colour. Dorothea continued. I had no silver hidden in my pocket when I gave away my supper. I had no wages for 3 weeks. Others waited longer. Rations shrank. Yet when one object disappeared, The person easiest to blame was the maid who had already asked why. Kersey stepped forward. "This is sentiment." "No," Dorothea said. "This is sequence." She pointed to the table. Shortages came first. Questions came next. Threats followed. Then silver appeared in my locked trunk, after a man with access to service keys was seen in the attic corridor while I was elsewhere. Kersey's face hardened. Lies from servants protecting one of their own. Thomas flinched. The housekeeper went pale. Rupert stepped forward then, but only enough to stand beside Dorothea. "External invoices are not servants," he said. "Wage authorizations are not servants. Access records are not servants. You may insult every person beneath stairs, Mr. Kersey, but paper has no rank to frighten." A murmur passed through the guests. Kersey looked toward Lady Marcella. She did not save him. The solicitor spoke. "There is sufficient evidence of account manipulation and financial irregularity to require formal examination. There is also sufficient evidence to reject any claim that Miss Hale's guilt was established merely by the discovery of the silver in her trunk." Rupert turned to Pritchard. "The salt cellar." Pritchard produced the study key, crossed to the cabinet, unlocked it in full view of the witnesses, and removed the same silver salt cellar that had been placed there after the search. He carried it directly to the table. One object, one explained movement. Rupert looked at the room. This was taken from Miss Hale's trunk and secured immediately under Pritchard's key. It has not moved since. It proves where it was found. It does not prove who put it there. Kersey's face had gone grey. "You cannot dismiss me on suspicion." Lady Marcella closed her eyes for one brief moment. When she opened them, Rupert answered, "I cannot sentence you for a crime. That is not my authority. But Lady Marcella may dismiss you from her household, and the account evidence will be referred to the local magistrate." Every face turned toward the Dowager Countess. She stood utterly still. Then, with visible effort, she said, "Mr. Kersey, you were dismissed from Redmarsh Hall." Kersey stared at her. "My lady, you heard me." He looked around the room as if searching for someone lower than himself to blame. No one moved. At last, he left. The doors closed behind him. Rupert did not let the silence become relief too quickly. He turned toward Lady Marcella. "The withheld wages." Her expression hardened. "Will be repaid," she said. "Through arrangements overseen by solicitors," Rupert replied. "So there can be no further ambiguity." Lady Marcella looked at Dorothea then. For the first time there was no disdain in her face, only defeat and something more difficult to name. Shame, perhaps. Dorothea did not need an apology dragged from her. She needed consequence. Rupert faced the room. Miss Dorothea Hale was publicly accused before guests in this house. Let the correction be equally plain. No evidence establishes that she stole the Rotherby salt cellar. The broader evidence shows that she recorded genuine shortages, identified unpaid wages, and spoke truth when silence would have been safer. He paused. Dorothea felt her heart beat once, hard. Rupert continued. "And I was wrong." Every head turned toward him. When Miss Hale asked whether I believed her, I chose caution over trust. I prevented punishment. But I did not stand beside her word when it mattered. That failure was mine. Dorothea looked at him. He did not soften the admission. He did not hide behind rank. For the first time since the drawing room, something in her finally loosened. Not all at once. Not forgiveness completed in a sentence, but enough. The guests began to leave in subdued groups. No applause followed. No triumphant cheer. Dorothea was grateful. Justice was not entertainment. By the time the great hall emptied, the housekeeper was speaking quietly. with the solicitor about unpaid staff. Thomas Reed stood straighter than before. Lady Marcella had withdrawn. The salt cellar had been returned to proper legal household custody, pending further inquiry. Dorothea gathered her notebook from the table. Rupert remained several feet away. He did not approach until they were alone, except for Pritchard in the distant corridor. Dorothea. She looked at him. Yes, Your Grace. I am not going to ask whether you love me. Her breath caught. Rupert's eyes held hers. Not today. Today was yours. She said nothing. He continued. But after time has passed, after you have had every chance to choose without debt, fear, gratitude, or scandal deciding for you. May I ask one thing? Dorothea's fingers tightened around her notebook. What? May I court you, properly? For one long moment, she looked at the man who had once accepted half a meal in the rain, the Duke who had failed her, apologized without excuse, and finally learned how to stand beside her without standing in front of her. After time has passed, she said. Rupert inclined his head. After time has passed. This time, neither of them mistook restraint for distance. 7 months later, Dorothea no longer woke, wondering whether there would be enough bread for the next morning. The knowledge should have felt simple. It did not. Abundance was easier to receive with the hands than with the memory. Even now, standing beneath the young green leaves of the beech trees at Calderwick Park, she sometimes caught herself counting what remained on a plate or calculating how long a loaf might last if divided carefully. Hunger had left her circumstances long before it left her habits. Rupert knew better than to tell her to forget. He had learned over the months of courtship that followed the gathering at Redmarsh that healing was not the erasure of what had happened. It was the freedom to remember without being ruled by it. Much had changed in those 7 months. Silas Kersey's case had gone before the local magistrate, supported by the account records, supplier, invoices, testimony regarding his access to the attic corridor, and further examination of the financial irregularities at Redmarsh. The legal process had not moved with the speed of melodrama, nor had every question been answered by a convenient confession. It had moved as such matters often did, through sworn statements, records, inquiries, and consequence. Kersey had not returned to Redmarsh. The servants whose wages had been withheld were repaid through arrangements overseen by solicitors. Exactly as Rupert had insisted, Lady Marcella remained Dowager Countess of Rotherby, for shame did not strip a noblewoman of her title, but her social authority had altered. Invitations grew fewer. Deference remained where rank demanded it, but admiration did not. More importantly to Dorothea, the people beneath stairs at Redmarsh received what they had been owed. That mattered more than gossip ever could. Dorothea never returned to service. Rupert did not ask her to. He asked permission to call upon her properly. And when she said yes, he did not mistake that yes for a promise of marriage. He visited her aunt's cottage in daylight. He wrote letters. He endured Mrs. Bell's suspicious questions about estate management, servants' conditions, and whether dukes were raised knowing how to carry coal. He answered all of them, sometimes badly. Dorothea discovered that Rupert could face a county room without hesitation, but become almost defenseless when her aunt asked whether he had ever mended his own stocking. No, he had admitted. Then your education was neglected, Mrs. Bell had replied. Dorothea had laughed until she could not pretend dignity. Rupert had stared at her as though the sound itself were worth being insulted for. Courtship changed them slowly. Dorothea learned that his silence was not always distance. Rupert learned that her refusal was not rejection merely because it displeased him. He did not buy her gratitude with gifts she had not requested. He did not offer rescue each time she faced discomfort. When gossip followed them, he stood beside her and allowed her to answer for herself. When she did not wish to answer, he let silence do the work. Months later, when he asked her to marry him, he did so privately in Mrs. Bell's small front room, with her aunt loudly occupied in the kitchen and Pritchard somewhere near the carriage outside. "I am not asking because you fed me," Rupert had said. Dorothea had looked at him for a long moment. Good. It would be an extravagant return on half a loaf. More than half. You changed the pieces. I continue to deny that accusation. Badly. He had almost smiled, then become serious again. I am asking because you taught me that seeing someone is not the same as choosing for them. Because you tell me the truth when it is inconvenient. Because I have never once been able to make you smaller in my mind to fit my comfort. Dorothea had looked down at her hands. And because you love me? Rupert had gone very still. Yes. The word had contained no performance. That too. The marriage settlement was arranged properly. Dorothea read every provision. Rupert expected nothing less. She entered the marriage with legal protections, personal security, and the knowledge that he had wanted her choice, not her dependence. By the time she became Duchess of Calderwick, society had produced every possible explanation except the simplest one. Some called it eccentricity. Others called it gratitude, elevated beyond reason. A few, with the cruelty of those who believed rank must be defended from happiness, called Dorothea ambitious. She ceased listening. Rupert had never loved an idea of her that society could confirm or deny. He had loved the woman who had contradicted him, left him, demanded evidence, refused safety without respect, and returned to Redmarsh because justice for herself alone was not enough. Now, beneath the beech trees at Calderwick Park, Dorothea sat on a woolen rug spread over the spring grass. The picnic basket stood open between them. Bread, cheese, apples, cold chicken. Cakes that Mrs. Bell had declared excessive and eaten anyway during her last visit. Rupert had dismissed the nearby footman for the next quarter hour. After Dorothea assured him they could manage to pour their own water without endangering the duchy. I remain unconvinced, Rupert said. You survived an axle breaking in an October storm. Barely. You walked 3 miles through mud, heroically. You were not heroic when you tried to steal my portion of bread. Rupert looked offended. I corrected an unequal distribution. Dorothea reached into the basket and withdrew the old embroidered breadcloth. She had carried it herself from her aunt's cottage when she left for her new home after the wedding. No servant had packed it. No maid had been asked to decide whether the worn cream linen belonged among the possessions of a duchess. In one corner, the faded green wheat still showed where her mother had stitched it years ago. The cloth was worn but intact. Dorothea spread it over the rug. Rupert's expression changed. He said nothing. She placed a fresh loaf upon it. For a moment, neither of them moved. Dorothea remembered wet stone beneath her feet, a torn coat sleeve, the cold passage, Kersey's voice telling her that by dawn she would lose her place and her reference. She remembered the hunger she had tried not to reveal. She remembered offering the larger piece to a stranger because she thought he needed it more. The memory no longer hurt in the same way. It did not disappear. It simply belonged to her now instead of ruling her. Rupert watched her hands. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. Dorothea looked up. "The bread? Any of it?" She considered the question. I regret that so many people had to suffer before anyone with power listened. Rupert accepted that without flinching. So do I. I regret that you failed me in the drawing room. His eyes lowered briefly. So do I. I regret that Lady Marcella believed preserving appearances mattered more than paying people what they were owed. Yes, Dorothea looked back at the bread, but I do not regret feeding you. Rupert's gaze returned to her, even knowing what followed. I did not feed a duke, she smiled faintly. I fed a wet, irritating man who was pretending not to be hungry. That is a very severe description of your husband. It is historically accurate. He laughed then, quietly. Dorothea broke the loaf into 2 pieces. Out of habit, one came larger than the other. Rupert looked down at them, then at her. May I keep the smaller piece this time? She narrowed her eyes. Why? Because I have spent 7 months being accused of bread theft without trial. There were witnesses. 1 witness, biased. I was the victim, allegedly. Dorothea laughed and switched the pieces in front of him, giving him the larger one. Rupert stared at it. You changed them. I have no idea what you mean. You are a poor liar. Then we still have common ground. He smiled, and the years of rank, restraint, scandal, hunger, doubt, and apology seemed to settle quietly behind them. Not erased, resolved. Dorothea looked at the full basket, at the uncut cheese, at the apples waiting beneath clean linen. For the first time in her life, she did not calculate whether enough would remain for tomorrow. She simply broke her bread, looked at the man beside her, and ate.